Hello there, my name is Brent, a user experience and product designer for nearly 20 years now, as well as a Bambu user since the X1C came out. I'd like to share my thoughts from using the H2D this past year, and now as a new owner of the H2C. But first, what is the user experience designer? It's mostly what it sounds like. At the center of our focus is a user's experience. How easy do they find a product to use? How many steps does it take to do a task? Is it clear? Can a new user pick it up quickly? Is it enjoyable? Can we remove obstacles and create features that make it faster and more enjoyable? All these factors and more go into making a great and seamless product, with most users unaware of these aspects until they are needed or become a problem. So we examine these factors by doing user interviews, surveys, and then theorizing how a product can be better. Then prototyping our designs and testing with real users to verify our designs meet these expectations. So as I'm reviewing these products, I'm not just reviewing how it works, I'm thinking about how it could be even better, even when and if it's already great. Bambu also recognized the importance of these factors when they released their first printer, the X1C. Bambu's strength right out of the gate was addressing the major hurdles getting started in 3D printing, so you didn't have to become an expert to start creating with melted plastic. I rarely used the printer I had before Bambu because I didn't want to constantly deal with manual leveling, confusing software and errors, and literally dozens of reasons why my print looked bad. It was a lot of work and experience before you reach the high quality and reliable print stage of the hobby. Bambu saw these issues and said, hey, there's an opportunity to distinguish ourselves. We'll make an easy, intuitive user experience, self-calibrating, high-quality machines at reasonable prices, and why not print insanely fast too? And the market responded. Some media sites report Bambu Lab has already captured nearly a third of global revenue share, over a quarter of the market in under 3 years. Now it's a standard experience that you can print from your phone, standard that you can easily print in multicolor, and increasingly rare that you need to diagnose any issues that are blocking your fun. We're not nearly at Star Trek replicator levels of easy, but we have come a long way. So Bambu clearly gets the value of listening to the users. But does the community? I've seen users post issues with their printers on Reddit. A recent bug, for example, where multiple users had issues with their printer plates getting destroyed by the nozzle if they turned off nozzle offset calibration. And some Reddit users hopefully only allowed minority, blaming the issues on user error. But consumer devices don't have a self-destruct button, and it should be pretty difficult to accidentally destroy a product. Bambu knows this, and within a week or two, updates started rolling out to prevent this from happening, which is exactly what you want to see. This is what I do, and this is what user experience-focused product designers and product teams do. Listen for problems, look for opportunities to improve, and then execute on it. But as for the community, I think the rejection of critical feedback boils down to the F word: fanboyism. Fanboyism is seeing legitimate criticism of a product as an attack on the brand, which they've come to love and identify with. So that now becomes an attack on themselves. But ask yourselves, if you truly love a brand, then would you not want to see it improve? If you have spinach in your teeth, are you the type of person that wouldn't want someone to tell you? So let's collectively squash this behavior and keep it in mind when I share the feedback in the review. Let's start with the AMS2 Pro, which brings in new, stronger motors, which are less likely to get bogged down like the AMS1, and now drying is baked in. For drying, it reaches 65C, which is hot enough for several filaments like PLA, PETG, and PCTG. Now, this is super convenient. But if you want nylon, PC, ABS, ASA, ideally you need their higher temperature single slot AMS HT, which reaches 85C. And for very exotic filaments like PPA, CF, Bambu doesn't sell anything to reach the temperatures it needs, so you have to get creative. I use an old Ninja air fryer and dry at 100C overnight. You can perhaps find these for $25 to $50. After some Bambu patents circulated, a number of reviewers speculated this new AMS would have multiple outputs to feed both nozzles in the new H2D. Stefan from CNC Kitchen asked the Bambu CEO why it only had one output, and they said that it did have a prototype, but couldn't make it reliable enough at the time. Without multi-outputs, you need 2 AMS units if you want both nozzles to have access to multicolor. I personally was expecting to drop in all my filament and the printer could figure out the best nozzle to send it to.
Set it and forget it.
Set it and forget it.
You just set it and forget it.
But with the single output, you need to put more consideration into the optimal location of the filament. You may need to manually move your dominant color for a print into the AMS on the other nozzle. And if you have just one AMS, you need to manually unload and reload it. This also adds another layer into the slicing experience because you have to direct Bambu as to what filament should go where. When you slice, you choose between filament saving mode, where Bambu tells you what's most efficient, convenience mode, just leave the filaments where they are, And custom, you manually direct the slicer to what colors go where. Now we can only speculate how their prototype actually worked, so why don't we? Here is a stylized version of how the AMS currently looks inside. 4 filament paths merging into one. One AMS can feed one nozzle, and if you want multicolor on the other, you need to manually move the AMS connection or buy a second AMS. But let's imagine there were 2 outputs. One AMS would be enough to feed either nozzle with any available color. Each roll of filament would have 2 routes it could switch between and reach either nozzle. Below each filament slot was perhaps a simple switch that would drive the filament to one of 2 paths. Would this still work with multiple AMS units? Why not? Each set of left and right paths would join with a 4-in-1 adapter. And in case of the H2C, we could simultaneously load and unload the right nozzle for faster swaps. What else could you do? Perhaps feed more than one machine at once? Then I don't need 2 sets of AMS units and 2 rolls of each filament for a print farm setup. Otherwise, these units are just sitting idle. Depending on the setup, if every filament can reach any nozzle, this could completely eliminate the need to choose your slicing mode every time.
Just set it, and you forget about it.
You just set it and then forget it.
I would also like to see them include a longer PTFE tube. Shorter runs are better for faster filament swaps, but not everyone's setup is ideal for short runs. Lastly, I would have liked to have seen 5 filament slots on the AMS too. This would also perfectly sit on top of the wider H2D and C, as well as help justify the price. And the price at $360, excluding tax, this should really be perfect in order to justify the cost. You could see users perhaps agree because when this was finally on sale for $300 during the 2025 holidays, they went out of stock or backorder for months. Now for the H2D, which I've had for about 8 months. In addition to the build plate increase over the H1C, a key change is the addition of a second nozzle, which saves significant time on 2-color or 2-material prints. It does help prints with more than 2 colors, but I've mostly used it as a support interface. For example, PLA interface for PETG prints. I've seen a definite increase in my usage of multicolor and material over my time compared to the H1C, where I would rarely justify the waste of filament and purge time. You also get a significantly wider bed, but you can't quite use the entirety of it since there are limits to the range of each nozzle. Let's talk about the evolution of the nozzles. In the first-gen printers, you had 2 bolts and 3 wire connections, which were rather fragile. If you changed them too many times, the connectors on the board would come out and require an entire board replacement. It also involved using thermal grease to make the thermistor function properly. When the A-series printers launched, there was a significant redesign, removing the wiring and bolts, which were replaced by a simple metal clasp. This made swapping much faster and easier. However, the trade-off is the bracket connector is very fine, and I have broken one on the A1 Mini where this design first appeared. The weakness of this design was if filament built up behind the flat back side of the nozzle, it would strain the metal clasp, making it difficult to close and easy to break. And many Bambu users figured out it's often easier to heat up the nozzle before removing and installing to loosen up this residue. Now the H2C, they perfected the hot swapping of the nozzle. I pulled this lock bar out, and this new induction nozzle is held steady with just magnets and can be instantly pulled out manually or swapped by the new Vortex rack. This pin pops up to grab the lock bar and allows the nozzle to be freely removed and replaced. It did get stuck a couple of times and I needed to help it, but overall seems reliable. Now what about the filament building up and blocking the nozzle mount? Bambu solved this in 2 ways. They changed the mounting mechanism to be much farther away from the tip, and they changed from a loose silicone cover to this snug silicone ring. So far, this seems to be a much more difficult obstacle for the filament to jump past. However, I can't say it's bulletproof yet. I have lost a couple of the silicone rings while I figured out how to dial in my print settings. So perhaps they could be made of an even harder silicone. Nozzle clumping. I have seen filament build up on the H2C nozzles a couple times, and when it's detected, the printer pauses with a nozzle clump warning. Instead, I think the printer should try to wipe the nozzle itself without asking me about it, and resume on its own. If I don't see the warning, print could be potentially waiting for hours or all night with a hot bed until I get back in to check on it. So for now, it's important that all your settings are dialed in to avoid this issue. And if you're curious how I fixed it, it was by lowering all acceleration speeds to a maximum of 1,000 millimeters a second. I believe this gives the filament a fraction of a second more time to solidify before the nozzle moves through it. I say fixed, but it didn't completely eliminate the warning, and I do need to occasionally clear the nozzle debris. One negative is they both leave random bits of filament all over the printer. I designed these trays to catch most of the random trash the printers drop, which fall to the bottom. Sometimes these bits also drop on the build plate while the printer is calibrating, and if you don't catch it, they'll become embedded in the first layer of your print. Maybe the printer could max out the fans to blow the surface clean before beginning the print. I think this problem is partially caused by the insufficient cleaning of the nozzle. In the first gen printer days, there were many wipe improvement models that would allow you to replace the PTFE wiper with a wire brush, for example. Also, there almost needs to be a shield around the waste area to block purge from being thrown into the main area of the printer. I've cleaned this area several times because if I don't, the camera AI thinks the waste chute is clogged, which pauses the print. Another strange error is nozzle offset calibration failing. If this fails, the print is completely aborted. However, if I restart these prints, they work fine, so the cause is not clear. This rapid induction heating on the new nozzle is amazing. It takes under 10 seconds to reach the print temperature. And this new system allows a color change in under a minute with very little waste except for what is used on the prime tower. Color bleeding is also now a thing of the past, as each filament can have its own nozzle. The bulk of time in color changes was loading enough of the new filament that every small bit of old filament was removed and didn't bleed into the next layers. Now, I've simplified their nozzles to 3 main versions, but what you didn't see was likely the hundreds of prototypes they built and thousands of testing hours to make these evolved versions happen. It's very easy to make something complicated and extremely difficult to make something simple. Despite the issues I pointed out, this new nozzle is so much more well thought out, they should have updated both nozzles to this style. If you want to try out the H2 debris catcher, check the comments for the link. You can also replace one of the side wedges with a handy organizer for 6 nozzles and the many accessories that come with the printer. Now for the dirty camera check. Ideally, it could wipe itself, but at least it should check before the printer heats up instead of after, so it's not running the heat for hours on end. Time lapses are a cool feature, but I don't see a practical value except to diagnose print malfunctions. During reprints, I'd like it to remember that I don't use time lapse and don't want it wasting the space on my USB drive. Manually loading is still a thing on the left nozzle, and I would like it to automatically pull in the filament to the nozzle like other printers. And also, when it asks if the filament has started coming out during loading, the nozzle camera should be doing that job and not asking me if it's coming out yet. Something else that would be nice is a bring to front button to quickly bring the head all the way forward and centered when you need to manually change nozzles. When setting your filament, it would be nice if the most recently used filaments are shown first instead of scrolling through a long list. When pulling out the build plate, I've also knocked the front Vortex nozzle loose 3 or 4 times. I'm definitely clumsy at times, but maybe some type of guard would be nice to block debris or user error. But the printer is great about detecting something wrong with the auto rack and pausing the print. Favorite prints on the USB drive. There are a lot of prints I like to redo, and they get lost in the recent list. This mockup shows you how you could split the USB files between recent and favorites. A great new feature is low power mode, which slows down the power draw when heating up the printer. And without that, the H2D has definitely flipped my breaker several times, and I had to move it to a different circuit. This low power heating takes about 7 to 8 minutes to reach ADC after all the calibration is done. Could bed heating potentially be started earlier in the preparation cycle to save time? Also, I'm hoping this feature makes its way to the H2D, which was the flagship just a few months ago. Now let's talk about Bambu Studio and the experience of switching from H2D to H2C. Profiles from one H-series printer can't be accessed by another. So even though some aspects of these printers are identical, you would need to rebuild your custom filament and print settings manually for each machine if you want to migrate. So when I wanted to bring my H2D files to the H2C, I have to recreate and copy every setting manually. I do frequently print the same thing on both printers, and I have to be careful about modifying one version of the files and not the other. There are a few quirks in the software. For example, when you move an object, it sometimes jumps when you click to drag the arrows, making precise movement difficult. Or sometimes the shortcut keys don't work, like M for move or R for rotate. Sometimes nothing happens when you press the I key. Like if you choose an object on the left side, shortcuts no longer work until you click something on the right panes. If I choose to work with an object with world coordinates, it should remember when I choose to edit the object again. Sometimes when an object is set to object coordinates, the movement drag arrows do not move in the same direction as the mouse. This can be awkward and unintuitive. When working on a complex file, one optimization I suggest is when you have nothing selected, the modifiers of an object should not be selectable to avoid accidentally selecting and moving these. It can be hard to avoid clicking these if they're large. Ideally, you can only select modified blocks and sub-objects once you're already focused on an object assembly. In a regular design app like Figma, a group is prioritized over the individual components. and either a hotkey or a double click is required to shift focus to a child object. Multiple nozzles now allow each nozzle to have its own speed setting, with the ability to copy settings from left to right, but I think it should be synced by default. Sometimes I'm changing speed and forgetting to copy it to the other nozzle and wondering why nothing is improving. I've made this mistake maybe 5 to 10 times. The prime tower and print by object. It would be nice if you could print by object and still use the prime tower. Here I have several small single color items that would be most efficient to print without layer swaps, as they don't need a prime tower. And also I have several multicolor items which do need the tower. To use the prime tower, I'm forced to use print by layer, which in this situation requires a color swap at every layer. I could do 2 separate prints, but it would be nice to run the single color items first and then the multicolor. You could also position these so the single color items are at the front of the printer and the multi are at the rear, so there's no interference from the print head. My thoughts on syncing. This syncing pop-up before you slice is a bit annoying. I'm sure to some extent it makes a difference in optimizing the final slice, but if it's not something critical, I prefer a don't ask again option. When you open a file set up for one printer, but you last printed on a different printer, you have to manually switch the selected printer back to the correct one in the Device tab, which is already inconvenient. But if you hit sync before doing this, it will screw up all your settings that are printer specific. It's a pain that doesn't need to be there. If you save the file before you realize what happened, it can be a real problem. Of course, I don't want to print a file set up for my H2D on my A1 Mini. The machine selection on the Prepare tab should dictate the Device tab, not the reverse. Slicing is also tied to syncing, as you can't use convenience mode until you have synced. And you want convenience mode because it doesn't require you to move your filament to new nozzles or AMS units. So let's go through the steps you actually need to do in order to sync if you're working with multiple model printers. So I just opened this file. This warning modal appears telling me my device is an A1 Mini and my file is set to an H2C. I don't want to switch the file to a printer it's not set up for, so why would it suggest that? I have no idea. But for demonstration purposes, I'll just choose later. So you can see I can't slice yet using convenience mode, so I switch to the Device tab. I open the device accordion, click on the H2C, and wait for it to connect. I switch back to the Prepare tab, the Sync Nozzle modal appears. I'm not mixing nozzle sizes, so I don't know why it appears, but I choose OK. Now I can access convenience mode in the Slice button. Glitches out a little bit here, but I'm able to access it. So that was about 8 steps to slice, which took about 30 to 45 seconds to run through. And this is why I mostly don't bother with syncing, as it just takes too long if you're frequently changing files or printers. It would also be ideal if custom remembered what you last chose if you happen to have changed it to convenience or filament saving. You can see here what I used the last was lost after changing to these modes. The cooling settings don't make sense. I personally struggled to get any of the cooling settings to operate the way I want, even after going through the tooltips and online help. Let's start at cooling for a specific layer section. You can set cooling for specific starting layers, but not other sets of layers. Which fan does this control? The part fan, the aux fan, chamber, all of them? For the part cooling fan, you have a myriad of settings that could be clearer. These layer time fields have the exact same name, but completely different functions. The first sets a minimum layer time, which will increase fan speed between min and max based on the distance from the minimum layer time. But the second field controls the print speed, and I believe has nothing to do with the part fan. This setting says don't slow down for outer walls. But what if the wall is an overhang with specific overhang settings? Which is prioritized? Can you tell the difference between cooling overhang threshold and overhang threshold for participating cooling? After several read-throughs of the descriptions, I believe the first changes the fan speed based on the overhang angle, and the second reduces the print speed based on the overhang angle. However, I definitely could be wrong. The way nozzle print speed settings are handled feels much more intuitive. If the overhang is in X range, print speed is this amount. And I think you could copy the approach used here. You guys in the comments might understand how the cooling settings work, but I'm looking beyond that to ask, does it make sense how it works? Is it easy? Is it intuitive? Would a first-time user be able to get it? So here's my attempt at a redesign, which, disclaimer, is based on how I believe certain settings work. Since there are quite a few fields, I've broken them into a new vertical strip of tabs. This makes complex areas easier to process by reducing the amount of noise and allows room to grow for future features. I've moved the specific layer fields to the All Fans tab, but now with the ability to set multiple layer ranges with specific speeds. I've added clearer labeling to explain this affects all fans, and the word override makes it clear this section supersedes other sections. Another approach would be to use modifier cubes outside of this modal. I've moved the 5 fields related to print speed to their own tab and added more control over speed to specific overhang ranges. This frees up the part fan tab to only its relevant controls. It also has a similar table to control overhang fan speed. Lastly, the seemingly neglected aux fan, but perhaps they'll expand its features in the future. The Bambu mobile app. There's a massive cache of ready-made prints that you can send to your printer with just a couple taps. And you get rewards for participating in creating designs, profiles, doing education material, which you can swap for gift cards and toys to enhance your experience. When it comes to printing, they've really mastered making a complex set of processes simple. To fit so much on a small screen is very difficult. You can change your printer, your build plate, nozzles, profiles, filaments, skip objects, and view 3D previews. It's a ton of complex problems designed so seamlessly that you forget how difficult or impossible all these options were just a few years ago. Monitoring your printer is so much easier than it used to be, but I think it could be even easier. Here are the current steps to view a printer's camera, not including opening the app. 1. The app opens on the Models tab, so you click on the Devices tab. Step 2, you click on the device name, which while we're looking at it is missing a visible indication that it is clickable. 3. You choose your device from the list. In step 4, you click the play button and wait for the camera to load. So here's what I came up with. You make the device tab the default, or at least give the user the option to make the device tab default, because what I am printing should supersede what I might want to print. The default printer should be an active printer because that's what I most likely want to check out. And instead of a drop-down, I went with a tab design, because if I do want to change to another printer, it's 1 tap instead of 2. Lastly, have the camera start automatically. Another idea is to have widgets to instantly view a particular printer and camera. The same way a Ring doorbell camera has individual camera widgets to instantly jump to the correct camera. So you can see with a little bit of creativity, you can drastically change the user's experience for the better. We've changed 4 steps into between 0 and 1 step with just some small tweaks. Overall, the combination of the Vortex system and multiple AMS units I think offers the best combination of flexibility and speed compared to other approaches like Prusa's INDX and the Snapmaker U1. Those might be faster at color changes, but with multiple AMS units, you have access to a larger pool of colors, which fits my needs better. Right now I have 4 AMS units, plus the left nozzle on my H2C, which allows up to 17 colors available, and allows me to offer 15 different color options and a couple more in the future. I'll continue using my H2C as my multicolor unit, and my H2D will be focused on engineering filaments. There's a huge convenience factor in not having to manually load and unload filament, while exposing those colors to moisture and air. The constant refinements, the listening to customer feedback, the extensive Maker World site with one-click printing really makes the Bambu system unbeatable. Now this setup is rather expensive and not for everyone. I'm selling products, so it's helping to pay for itself. But there is a nice gamut of machines at different price ranges to fit your needs. And at the moment, it's not so bulletproof that I'm comfortable leaving it running during the night when I'm asleep, but I think very soon it will get there. What would you change about the Bambu user experience if you were on their product team? Did you enjoy this video? Would you like to see more in-depth reviews and redesigns? Let me know in the comments. Happy printing!